A customer has a crush and a gun. When I was 18 years old, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown, and I often worked there picking up shifts and closing 6 nights a week. I had lots of regulars and lots of randoms, but other than maybe a few awkward orders, I never really had a problem with a customer being inappropriate or out of hand. This night was already really stressful for me, as it was Halloween, and I was a little bummed to be closing while my friends were out and about. But I had friends to go to a house that my friends rented right down the street after work, with some pastries and Red Bull, so I didn't really mind it too much. It was about 9:45, and I was already ready to close right at 10. I had been dead since about 8, and all I had to do was a final register count. Everything was clean, and I was reading a book to pass the time, trying not to watch the clock. Our counter, by the way, is like a bar counter, long, with a register near the door at the closed end, and with the one far end open for us to go in and out of, right near the door to our back room. A man walked in the front door. He looked to be mid-20s. He was black, had on a big hoodie, and was wearing sweatpants that sagged down, so I could see the waistbands of 2 different pairs of gym shorts underneath. I am a young white female, but I have no fear of people and I'm not racist, so I didn't bat an eyelash when he walked in with one hand in a hoodie pocket, and the other in the pocket of one of the pairs of gym shorts. Men of all races wear clothes like that, and carry themselves that way, at least where I live, so with no concern, I greeted him and asked him how he was and what he was thinking of ordering. He took his time responding, but wasn't looking at the menu or at the chalkboard with seasonal drink offers. He was looking at the front door. He took about a minute, then turned to me and asked my name. I often had male customers ask this, females too, so I told him, and then asked again what he was looking to order. He began to ask me more questions about me and my job. He asked if I liked it. I responded, thinking maybe he wanted like a job application, and gave him a very short version of how I felt. It was almost 9:50. I kept checking my phone, thinking that I just wanted to make his drink so I could clean up again and meet my friends. He nodded, saying he thought I liked my job, which I thought was strange, but again didn't think about. I agreed again. He then started to ask about the shifts I worked. I figured he had sympathy that it was Halloween, and I gave him a vague answer. He then asked why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart jumped. I didn't see that one coming from a mile away. I struggled to respond, and he continued, and asked if Sunday mornings were better than Wednesday nights. At this point, I broke into nervous laughter and smiles, asking him if he was looking to work for the coffee shop, and that we needed the help. He stopped smiling at this point, and his hand in his hoodie pocket made an abrupt move to the very inside pair of his gym shorts, basically so that he would be grabbing himself. He didn't quite reach in all the way, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I asked him to order or leave, as the end of our business day was almost there, and that I need to clean and lock up. At this point, I grabbed my cell phone and kept it in my hand, thinking how can I dial 911 and not have him begin to molest himself in front of me, for whatever he planned on doing. He began to sort of lean on the counter and asked me questions. He asked me where I lived, did I have a boyfriend, what were my plans for that night. I was trying hard not to cry and trying my best to lie through more vague answers, hoping he would go away if I just didn't freak out. He began to move away from the register, still leaning on the counter, hands in his pants, towards the open end of the bar. I began to back as far towards the front door as possible, but that end had no opening and was so high I couldn't jump it without considerable effort and climbing over an espresso machine. The only other exit I could think of was our narrow drive-through window. Clutching my phone, I asked him what he wanted. For some reason, he stopped. He stood up and looked towards the front door, then turned to look at the clock behind him. I took the chance to start writing a text message to my friend and said, "If I'm not at your place in 10 minutes, call the police." He caught me sending the text and asked me who I was texting. I told him my boyfriend, and his face became something that I'll never forget. His eyes blazed, and he was still as stone. He calmly told me to throw my cell phone across the floor, specifically telling me to try and throw it into the drive-thru. I had to really toss it about 9 feet away. After he began to scream, making his way again down the counter, he asked me how I could have a boyfriend when he has been watching me at work for the last 2 months as often as possible, and had never seen a man drop me off or pick me up at work. He pointed to the side of the building that I parked on and said he knew I parked my blue Toyota there earlier, not to lie to him. I asked him to leave, beginning to cry. He began to describe my work shifts to a T. When I came in, when I left, how I smoked across the street on break. He told me that he knew that I only drank the Diet Coke that we sold, and that I always cranked my music up when I started my car. At that point, he pulled a small gun out of the gym shorts and waved it around as he said that I was stupid to lie to him and that he knew it all. He was going between enraged and laughing, as if he couldn't believe that I didn't want to talk to him or that it was funny that I was scared. I offered him all the money in the register and he laughed again, like hysterically. And then again, once still, he said, and I'll never forget this moment, "I'm not here for any money, Marina. I'm not here for a job. I think you know what I'm here for." I'm sobbing now, and it made him either frustrated or sympathetic, and he began to say how I need to calm down, that he was just really excited to see me. He still had one hand down near his dick and began to fondle himself, holding the gun with the other hand, and about 3 feet away from the opening in the bar. I asked him again to please leave. When he didn't move, I asked him what I did to him and why was this happening. He began to speak, saying that was really pretty. He was continuing to talk when all of a sudden, my friend walked in the door with his friends in tow. There were 5 guys all together and all in a metal band together, so they were a pretty distinct group of guys. The man quickly put the gun in his hoodie pocket, so quickly that only 2 of my friends noticed it. He ran for the door, pushing past my friends, and disappeared into the night. I threw up as soon as he was gone, and 2 of my friends ran out after him, but didn't gain on him enough and didn't see where he went to. I quit my job the next day and called the police. There was never any follow-up, and I still wonder about what the fuck did or didn't happen to me that night. My morbid crush. This takes place over the course of the first semester of my senior year of high school. Being a lonely girl at the time, I didn't have many friends and became rather attached to people I believed to be my friends. So anyways, there was a boy I had a crush on who we'll call Keith. He was the silent genius of the school, who knew about a lot, but never took the initiative to participate in class or take his classwork seriously. Usually reading a book, doing that evening's homework when he cared enough, or browsing the internet on our school-issued laptops during class. So one day in English class, I'm sitting next to him in the back row of desks. When our teacher pairs us up to work on a project together, Keith, seeming disinterested, looked at me and then back at his laptop to continue whatever he was doing while I tried to talk to him. Finally, we began talking. He was rather quick to open up to me about some stuff. I thought he may be interested in me. By the way, he smiled at me while talking about things that I didn't even know about. His vocabulary was extensive and he was funny too. This was a side of him I'd never seen before, and I felt like I was growing to like him even more than I did before. So we begin working on our project when the bell rings and we go our separate ways. I didn't see him the rest of the day, but I wanted to real bad. I had a crush on this boy. Whenever I saw him in the hallways, I smiled. He even came and sat next to me at lunch one day, and my heart almost leapt out of my mouth. He was outgoing with my friends, and they quickly liked him too. They asked if he was my boyfriend, and despite wishing it was true, I denied it. During my astronomy class one day, I was surprised to see Keith come in, despite him not being part of our class. He told our teacher that he switched classes, and the teacher confirmed it. Awesome! I got to see him more. He smiled at me and sat down in his seat as the class resumed, during which we exchanged looks and smiles. Everything went fine for about a month. Keith and I had exchanged phone numbers during that period, and we hung out over the weekends, usually on a regular basis. I was waiting for him to ask me out, but he never did. I felt disappointed for the longest time. Then one day in English class, Keith gets up to use the bathroom, and I decide to look at his laptop. Overly attached friend, I know, don't remind me. Keith always took his time in the bathroom, so I felt safe looking through it, without him coming in out of nowhere and seeing me. I opened up several folders on his desktop to find nothing but schoolwork and the occasional photo of his favorite sports team. Then I opened a folder marked Anatomy and Physiology. Keith told me his school schedule in the past, and he didn't have this class. I got curious and opened it up. I was shocked after opening up a photo file to see a picture of a dead girl lying on the ground, naked. I felt my heart drop as I opened up a Microsoft Word file entitled AMPHW and found lists of websites like that I didn't even want to know about. I felt like I'd open out one more photo, which was the last one in the folder. I almost cried as I opened it up to see a photo of me that he took one day when we were at my house, except he had photoshopped blood on my body and the letter X over my eyes. I shrieked in horror and jumped back into my seat, the teacher somehow not hearing me, but several students did and asked what was wrong. I began crying and asked to go see the guidance counselor. As I walked past the restrooms, I didn't see Keith. When I got to the guidance counselor's office, I waited until he came back out, and I talked to him about Keith. He didn't believe me at first, thinking I was doing it for attention, but eventually, he told me that he would talk to him. I didn't hear anything afterwards for the rest of the year, but one day Keith was absent and didn't return for the rest of the year. I don't want to be annoying. The story started with a gathering at my school. It was mostly for people who went to high school, but people who had already graduated were also invited too. I went there with a friend, but I only stayed for like half an hour. It was nothing special. For me, it was rather boring. When I got home and checked my Facebook, I had one new friend request and a message. It was from a guy who had graduated from my school. I'm very open and friendly, so I accepted the friend request and wrote him back. His first messages were normal, the casual "how are you doing" and such. He also talked a lot about this Valentine's Day party that was supposed to take place at my school. At the beginning, I replied to his messages out of politeness. Then the messages became more frequent. He wrote me nonstop. He started calling me beautiful and saying he was falling in love with me. Dude, the fuck? He had only seen me once and we didn't even talk that time. I told him politely that I wasn't interested in communicating with him. It didn't help. Then I started ignoring him because I was getting really uncomfortable. Sometimes it seemed like he didn't even need me to send him a message, like he was talking to himself when writing me. He was asking questions and answering himself like he had an illusion that he was actually talking to me. I became more and more annoyed with every single day, and even though I rarely block anyone, I blocked him on Facebook. I thought maybe that he would get the hint that I'm not interested in him. Well, I was wrong. For a few weeks, it was quiet. Until the Valentine's Day party. I went there with my friends. We were just hanging around and talking. At one point, one of my friends started laughing and asked me, "Who is this guy?" Yes, this creeper was standing in a corner and just staring at me. He was whispering something. At first, I couldn't tell what he was saying, but then I realized that he was whispering my name. It was really creepy, and I just tried to ignore him. My friends laughed about it, and I guess he got embarrassed and left. The next day, I was performing my usual internet routine, Twitter, Instagram, etc. When I checked my email, I had a letter from him. Okay, it's not to figure out my email since it's my full name, but it was still odd that he knew it. The letter was about how he had enjoyed talking to me at the party, and how he wished we had talked more. He also begged him to unblock him on Facebook. I didn't even say a word to him. He also made a Twitter account and sent me a follower request. His tweets were addressed to me or about me. Every time I denied his request, he sent me a new one in minutes. Then the messages started. I was getting really creeped out because my phone number wasn't on my Facebook or anywhere on the internet. He told me in these messages that he didn't want to argue with me and that he didn't like when we were fighting. He begged me to unblock him again. I didn't answer any of the messages and just hoped he would just leave me alone. Nope. I was taking a shower one morning and I heard my phone ringing in the other room. I ignored it at first, as I always do, but it just wouldn't stop ringing. I thought maybe it was an emergency and maybe someone from my family was calling. Unknown number, tons of missed calls. I answered and knew immediately that it was the same guy. I yelled at him to leave me alone, that I wasn't interested, and that he was annoying the hell out of me. He answered that he didn't want to be annoying, in a really sad voice. It seemed like he was crying, but it wasn't like a sincere cry. It sounded like he was faking it. I hung up and luckily he didn't call anymore. It was quiet for months, and then he started messaging me again, but it wasn't that frequent anymore. I didn't answer and he stopped for a while. I almost forgot about him. But then he showed up at my graduation. He brought me a rose and tried to shake my hand. It was the grossest handshake I'd ever received. His hand was limp like a noodle, and that was so uncomfortable. Seeing him there kind of ruined my day. He tried to chat with me, but I just left him power walk to my friends. After the graduation, I was looking through the pictures that my friends had taken, and he was almost in every single one, just staring at me from a distance. Really creepy. I know it's not the worst stalker story, but it was really uncomfortable and creepy for me. Luckily, I haven't heard from him since graduation, and I really hope it will stay this way. Am I being stalked or just paranoid? So, let me preface this by saying I am a horrible writer, so I hope this isn't too difficult to follow. So this is something that is currently happening as of yesterday still. I am a young American man living in a small Thailand town for work. I've been here for half a year now, so probably the second month I got here. There is someone who must have been searching the hashtag for the town. I'm in on IG. He liked my post, followed me, and I did the same in return. Eventually, the link between the two led him to sending a friend request, which I accepted. It'd be nice to have a friend that can speak English here. He's a London-born Thai male who is in Thailand now for his mandatory military service. Later, I ended up meeting him outside of a 7-Eleven by chance. He said, "You beer him?" I never seen his face because I didn't really care to look at his profile, but I assumed it was him based off the British accent. I said, "Hey." We chatted a bit. I ran into him here and there. We live by each other, so it's gonna happen, I guess. Anyways, I ended up moving a few kilometers away from him, and I ended up happening upon two abandoned kittens that are raised with goat milk, and now they're feet-healthy kittens. But about 2 months ago, I posted my Snapchat on Facebook, because I was in my team's corner for some Muay Thai fights, and I was getting cool videos of little kids and girls fighting. He added me. After that, I started running into him everywhere. I found one time a bit suspicious when he ran into me at 7-Eleven, but he had a bag of cat food with him he wanted to give. Whatever, weird. But it's a sweet gesture. I kept running into him a few times a week, but a few days ago it got really weird. I was at a restaurant I've been going to every night for the past week, some great shrimp tom yum place. While I was getting on my bike, I heard someone say, "You beer him?" I saw it was him. I said, "Oh hey." We chatted for a while, and then he asked me, "So you come here every day?" I thought that's weird. How could he know that? So I said, "Yeah, I had been." But then he told me, "I think someone here might have a secret crush on you." I thought that was really weird. I said, "Why?" He said, "'Cause the girls here always stare at you." That's when I thought, okay, dude, what the fuck? If you just happened to be pulling out when I was leaving, how could you see that? Whatever. I didn't question it. He then told me, "There's another American girl here I talked to. She says she wants to learn Muay Thai. I told her about your gym. Think she could go?" I told him no, because my gym doesn't take my money, and it's like a real fighter gym. Everyone there except me fights really often. It's not a fitness gym or gym that makes money by training foreigners. It's a rundown badass gym. I don't want to rudely bring girls there that don't know anything. That can't really help the gym. While I don't fight, I contribute to the gym and the fighters by training, drilling, and sparring with them. It's just a gym full of young guys fighting. I said she should go to this other gym that caters to foreigners and women. Then he asked me, "Where is your gym anyways?" I tried to explain it, but he said, "Can you show me on maps?" So I stupidly did. I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was that night when I remembered, holy shit, I never turned off the location feature on Snapchat. So I turned that off yesterday morning. But soon after I went to 7-Eleven, I parked in the alley there. So when I was getting back on my motorbike at night, he fucking pops out behind a pole. Now, because I'm a good Minnesota boy, I don't like confrontation that's awkward, so I just tried to not flip on him and said, "You scared?" But he cut me off and waved his hand and walked away without saying anything. It was fucking weird. So what do you guys think? Is this a coincidence or is something suspicious here? I'm not scared. I mean, physically nothing could happen unless he has a weapon, but the whole thing just feels off. Not your ordinary middle school crush. This entire situation still sits in the back of my mind, and I think it belongs here. When I was in middle school, I had an admirer, Josh. Josh wasn't exactly the kind of kid anyone knew too well, but he did have a few friends that he hung around with. I hadn't really flagged him down as anything more than an ordinary middle schooler like myself, only that he had a somewhat odd obsession with dueling tanks and weapons. But middle schoolers are middle schoolers, right? My friends had noticed the attention he gave me before I ever did. He had a photo of our class, which my friend once asked to see. He pointed at my face in particular, and made a heart with his hands. She stared at him, laughing nervously, and left to tell me about it. Here are just a few of the red flags I tried to ignore. 1. The teacher ended up arranging the class so that Josh sat next to me, near the back of the class. I had once caught him quickly closing a tab on his computer or something that I can only describe as a torture game, with a semi-realistic screaming person who you could interact with using different tools. 2. Sitting next to him made things turn sour quickly. He began to say rude and degrading comments about me to my face. I remember groaning loudly in frustration and annoyance over some kind of math problem, to which he responded, "I love to make you make a noise like that." I shuddered, but did not speak up to anyone about it. 3. I bought a pair of steel-toed leather boots for my birthday. I wore them to school for the first time and he said, "Promise not to kick me with those?" I said, "Don't give me a reason to and I won't have to." He grinned, eerily replying, "I make no promises." 4. Graduation night came around. Everyone was dressed up by their parents in dresses and suits, and I was no exception. After the ceremony, our school had a graduation dinner and dance hosted in banquet hall after parents and guests left. My friends all sat together at a large table, and in classic female fashion, we went to the washroom as a group. After I stood up to leave with my friends, Josh stood up too. As we started to leave the hall, Josh lingered behind, slowly following us. I went into the women's washroom with my friends only to see that there was a long lineup inside, so I told him I would wait out in the hallway around the corner. Josh came walking down the hallway soon after, looking around. He walked right up to the women's washroom door, still looking around. He was about to open it when I walked out from a corner and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Why are you out here?" "I'm waiting. What are you here for?" "I'm going to the bathroom." "There's a line inside. That's a woman's bathroom," as I pointed to the door he was in front of, clearly labeled with a friggin' sign. He stepped away from it now, stepped far away from the door to the point where he pressed against the wall opposite the washroom. I do not think I'll ever forget what he said to me then. He smiled at me, fully grinning now, and said quietly, "I'll pay you not to tell." I didn't know how to respond to that. His voice was filled with malice, and something about the situation felt very, very wrong. I backed away, declining whatever number of bills he had already pulled out of his pocket. He quickly turned around and went back into the hall. He didn't even go into the men's washroom despite having said that he was there to use it. For quite some time, the thoughts plagued me. What if I had been inside the woman's bathroom and no one was around? Why was he out there? Why did he offer to pay me? I later recalled that he had been suspended from school after a situation occurred between him and another female student, but this had happened before I transferred to the school, and I don't know the complete details. I don't know where Josh is now, or if this behavior has escalated. I tried to rationalize his behavior for years, but I still strongly believe that this was no ordinary middle school crush. So Josh, let's never meet again. I still wear my steel-toed boots all the time. The disadvantages of dating a musician. Hi, I've been reading the subreddit for some time now, and finally decided to make an account and share my own story, so here goes. Bear with me, I'm new. This all took place last year when I was 19 years old. I'm a female, by the way. Last year I moved in with my boyfriend. He is in a band, so naturally he has a lot of musician friends. We rented this lovely house, and I guess his friends decided this would be their new hangout spot. I didn't mind, since I love being around these interesting people, and they always brought goodies like booze, weed, and music. It was basically a party every night, with music blaring and all of us talking, drinking, smoking, the like. My boyfriend's musician friends would often bring their own friends, people I didn't know. I didn't think much of or really care, as I was usually wasted and not thinking straight. Or maybe I was just being really stupid. One night, or morning I guess, as it was 3 a.m., after everyone had left, my boyfriend and I went to sleep in our bedroom upstairs. After only sleeping for about an hour and a half, I woke for whatever reason, and after a few moments, I heard the stairs creaking. I didn't think anything of it, of course. The house was pretty old. As I lay in bed, I heard the undeniable sound of footsteps out in the hall. My heart skipped a beat until I realized it was probably my boyfriend's bandmate, who basically lived with us. I figured he must have come in and decided to crash for the night, and was making his way to the guest bedroom with the futon. So I called out his name to see what he was up to. Graham! Silence. The footsteps stopped. My heart started beating faster. My boyfriend, being the heavy sleeper he is, slept on. I shook him awake and whispered, I hear someone in the hall, and I don't think it's Graham. He sat up all alert and whispered, wait here. Yeah, right. I wasn't going to let him go by himself. I followed him to the bedroom door and he opened it. The hall was empty. I pointed down the hall to the other room, and he held up his hand to me in a stop gesture and gave me a warning look. I followed him down the hall. We could hear rustling coming from the other room. I picked up a heavy candle on my hall table in case we needed a weapon, since nothing else was available. I actually felt a little silly. I thought to myself that I was just being paranoid, and it's probably just Graham messing around with us. Once we reached the door, though, I felt a strange feeling of dread and had the strong urge to turn back. I don't know why I didn't. I had no idea what to expect. The door was open a crack. My boyfriend stood in front of me protectively and swung open the door, flicking on the light. Standing over the dresser was a tall, rail-thin man. I knew him from somewhere but didn't have time to remember where, obviously. What the fuck are you doing in my house? I'm calling the police! My boyfriend shouted at him. The man had a shocked look on his face that quickly turned to an angry one. It was terrifying. He looked frozen, then suddenly lunged at my boyfriend. I guess the adrenaline and instinct to protect a loved one kicked in me, because I pushed my way past my boyfriend and bashed the guy over the head with the corner of that huge, heavy candle. He went to the ground and appeared to be knocked out. I started screaming nonsense and looked at my boyfriend, waiting for him to figure out what to do. In the end, he tied the guy's hands with a belt while I ran and called the police. They arrived just a few minutes later. I later learned that this man was a friend of one of my boyfriend's friends, who really was just his drug dealer. He had been brought to our house several times to hang out. My boyfriend recognized him right away that night, as he had seen him at our house the night before. Needless to say, after that, we never let anyone we didn't know enter our house. A bit of a PSA, my ex-boyfriend broke into my house. Feel free to remove this if it's not creepy enough. But it really scared the shit out of me. I was a late bloomer and got my first boyfriend at the age of 20. I was a senior in college. I am a very shy, anxious person, so I was thrilled to finally have a boyfriend. He seemed wonderful at first. He complimented me constantly, surprised me with flowers, the whole 9 yards. Red flags started popping up, but he was so nice otherwise, I tried to ignore them. He said he loved me after only 2 weeks, and pressured me to say the same. He'd become depressed and angry if I declined his invitation to hang out, or had any other plans. When we'd fight, which became more and more frequent as time went on, he convinced me I was to blame or overreacting, and then when we made up, would go on and on about his love for me and how much he did for me. As a child of narcissistic parents, I could recognize how wrong this was only in retrospect. A full year went by, things got worse and worse. If I suggested breaking up, he'd have an utter meltdown. He'd sometimes throw up, he'd cry, beg, plead, and alternately insult me and call me a heartless bitch. Then he'd take back his insult and say I just upset him. Finally, I got the courage to really end things. He was enraged. He refused to leave my apartment. He screamed at me, crying through his phone and smashed it, and ripped the covers off of my bed. Finally, I basically pushed him out the door and locked it. He then sent me over 60 emails, texts, and phone calls. I blocked him everywhere I could. Now comes the terrifying part. The next day, I heard the doorbell ring and I knew it was him, so I stayed very quiet in bed and didn't open the door. Eventually, he rang it so much that the landlords who lived below me confronted him. Horrified, I listened through the door and heard him tell I was expecting him and must be asleep, and they let him in. I rushed and locked the thin door that separated me from the stairs up to my living room from the main entrance. He knew I was inside, though, because that door is never locked. He pounded and banged on the door for almost an hour, alternately swearing at me and pleading with me. Finally, I called the police. They were very skeptical and basically told me I was overdramatic, and they told him not to come back again, and sufficiently scared him. I could have pressed charges, but did not, as I just wanted it all to be over with and didn't want to incur his wrath. Anyways, I fully blocked him on all channels and moved apartments, but he did manage to contact me begging to be forgiven, accusing me of abusiveness, and then enraged, insulting me grievously. In therapy, I learned he likely has borderline personality disorder, which means he has a pathological fear of rejection. These people are irrational and even dangerous. PSA, break up and cut ties with your partner immediately if they treat you like this. I am now suffering mild PTSD from the whole ordeal. Send me no flowers. During the MySpace days, I would get lots of random friend requests from people I didn't know. I had the bad habit of just adding everyone because at the time, I didn't mind and it was easy to accept all if you just had a few of them. Some people would send messages randomly to try to get a response, but I usually just ignored them. It was all kinds of pointless, but social media seemed to have that trend sometimes. One day, I got a random message from this guy that seemed nice enough, but I felt sorry for him when I saw his profile picture. He was definitely not attractive, but I felt inclined to scroll through his pictures. He seemed like a loner type from a small town. I felt like I would be nice and send him a friendly reply. He immediately responded, and I continued with friendly chatter, nothing major. Long story short, the guy became obsessed with sending messages. I began ignoring most of them. He wouldn't say anything creepy, but he wasn't getting the hint that I wasn't attracted to him. I think there were about 20 "what's up" in a row at one point. Flash forward to when Facebook was getting popular and MySpace was becoming ghost town of online presence. I was much more selective of who I was adding as a friend. I tried my best to limit it to people I knew, or at least who lived in my city. One night, I got a text on my phone that said, "Hey, this is Chris," with an area code from a different city. I asked what his last name is, and find out that it's the obsessive guy from 2 years before. I log into Facebook and notice that I somehow am friends with him and have no idea how it happened. I asked him how he got my number. It wasn't public on Facebook, and he avoided the question, saying he was coming to visit my city soon and wanted to take me to dinner. I still played it nice, but declined, of course. And then he started saying how lonely he's been, that he had to hire male escorts to spend the night at his hotels that he stayed at recently. I ignored him. One weekday, I started getting lots of texts from him saying he was in town and really wanted to take me out. I said I was way too busy, although I should have ignored it. I thought being direct would be best. He kept insisting. The next day, I'm walking from the apartment building I live at to a Jason's Deli down the streets. I get my food, and as I walk out, I look directly into his eyes as he is staring at me. I quickly looked away and kept walking, acting like I didn't recognize him. I was hoping this was a coincidence, but it just seemed too random. Immediately, within 3 minutes, he texted me, "Please go to dinner with me tonight." I kept making sure I wasn't being followed. I didn't respond to any more of his texts. The next day, I get a call from the receptionist at the office I worked for. I was at home at the time. She left a voicemail that said, "There's some weird guy that keeps saying he has lunch plans with you. I don't know what you want me to do. He also brought flowers." So, he saw where I worked on Facebook and went there. The receptionist laughed about them, and I told her to throw them away. He had sporadically continued to text me from different numbers but I do not respond. He was probably harmless, but it still goes to show what can happen if you just want to be nice to a helpless person one day. Always listen to your gut. My last relationship was not a happy one. Dimitri had told me he was a Navy SEAL, and I admit I didn't dig deep enough to find out the truth. I asked him for his BUD S-class and swim buddy, and he gave the correct answer, so I let it go at that. Over the course of several years, he became increasingly unstable. He would go from being incredibly nice and attentive to psychologically abusing me. He was very good at crawling inside my head, especially given the PTSD I have thanks to the army. The last thing he told me, though, was that he was going to have me killed over some imagined slight. I don't even remember what it was. It was so insignificant. I really didn't think anything of it at the time. He'd hurled so much abuse my way, I was pretty numb to it by then. Dimitri faked his death and disappeared from the radar. I did some digging on him and found out our whole relationship had been one huge lie. He wasn't a SEAL. The cell was a Google Voice account, and the name I knew him by didn't exist, hence why I say he faked his death. That bothered me. Why would he bother to create such an elaborate lie for someone like me? I had nothing. I was damaged goods, like I said. I didn't have money or a fancy car or a nice house, so I didn't understand. I also forgot about his threat. I hike a lot. I hike a well-known area where I live. It's patrolled by rangers, and it's never completely empty of people, even during the week. I had gone out there to hike, and a migraine started flaring up on me. Well, I have this one huge boulder about 50 yards or so off the main trail that I like sitting on, so I headed for it. I didn't have earbuds in. I got up on my rock and put my head down thinking the cold from the stone would help some. Understand that you can see the top of the rock from the trail. You can see from a distance if someone is on it, even if they're lying down. There's a lot of deer in the woods there, and there's wild turkey also. So when I started hearing rustling, I, at first, passed it off as one of the two. When I realized it was getting close, I sat up. This man climbed up on the rock with me. He was wearing a black shirt, black shorts, black socks, black tennis shoes, and had a huge black backpack. He also wore black sunglasses. He was bald, no facial hair, and very pale. He looks down at me with a smug little smile and says, "You don't mind sharing your rock with me now, do you?" I tell him I'm leaving. He steps closer to me, blocking the safe way down off this boulder, and says, "We can share this rock." I grabbed my shit and flew down off the boulder. I'm very lucky I didn't break anything, considering it was at least an 8-foot drop to the ground from where I was. When I hit the ground and nothing broke, I took off running, and I ran until I was a mile away. I also contacted the LEO ranger on duty, and he had a meeting with him. Between the two of us, we had never seen anyone fitting his description. He told me it was legal to carry on the trails there, so yes, I carry now. It wasn't until after I talked to the ranger that I remember Dimitri's threat. He knew I hiked there. He, thanks to Google, could trace the routes I take. He was incredibly smart, so I'm sure he knew which boulder I want to meditate on. So no, I don't believe that was a coincidence. I've since spoken to an attorney and legally changed my name. I changed vehicles also and dyed my hair a different color, and I stayed away from the hiking trails for a few months, just in case. And I am very, very vigilant when I hike now. I was in love with him in a past life. This happened to my family and me barely a month ago. I was visiting from college for my birthday. My mother, being generous as she is, offered to take me to a very nice restaurant. Since the town was so small and we lived so close to the downtown area, my mother and I decided to walk. We passed a few dilapidated Victorian homes as we neared the downtown. Suddenly I hear a soft voice saying, "Rachel." Not even as a question, just a simple statement of my mother's name. She kind of looks around and sees this man, sitting on a worn-out bench from a particularly rough-looking home. "Jason?" she asks. He skulks out of the shadows of the porch and meets us at the gate. "Rachel," he says again. He has a very high-pitched, effeminate voice. He asks who I am, and my mother introduces me. We get into a conversation about where I've been for the summer, and he mentions his family lives up there. He seems rather polite, and I don't really notice anything strange about him. There's a lull in the conversation, and Jason looks to my mother, suddenly serious. "Can I ask you something?" He asks her hesitantly. "Of course," she says, smiling. "Have we been talking like this?" He gestures from his head to hers. obviously asking if they had a telepathic communication. My mother just smiles back and says, "Nope." He looks at her completely in disbelief. "Are you sure?" "Yep," she says, still smiling. As a little explanation for my mom's reaction, she is a school psychologist and is very patient and professional, dealing with people in all sorts of situations. It was very remarkable, and I was completely uncomfortable and wanted to just walk away awkwardly. Jason then goes on to talk about how he just recently got his psychic powers, and they haven't developed completely yet. Then goes off on a tangent on past lives, mentioning that he knows who my stepfather was in a past life, but not my mom. Then continues on to talk about his dead mother who committed suicide, but he knows now she's in a better place and he's doing much better about it. My mom tells him she's glad he's feeling better, and that we have to go because my grandma's babysitting my brother. As we walk to my house, I ask her, "He's schizophrenic, isn't he?" "Paranoid schizophrenic. He visits the shop regularly. He's taken quite a liking to Chad, my stepfather. Jason's come over to our house a few times, and it's been really hard to make him leave. Chad will be making dinner and saying, 'Well, I really need to make dinner for the kids, so you better go.' And Jason will just respond, 'Oh, what are you making for dinner?' He really creeps me out, so I try to get Chad to keep him away from the house. At this point, my stepfather was away on a week-long backpacking trip with his friends, so it was just me, my mom, two of my brothers, at the house. I told her not to worry, and that if Jason tried to come to the house, I'd protect her. I did kung fu for a few years. So a few days later, I drive home, and not 2 hours into my trip, I get this phone call from my mother. She's calm as ever, but I could tell she was a bit more shaken up than she was letting on. My mom told me that she had been napping in her room with the baby when she heard my younger brother Derek talking. She didn't think anything of it until she heard someone else respond, and Derek say, "She's in her room." So Jason walks into the room with her lying on the bed with the baby. My mom then proceeds to tell him to leave and that this isn't a good time. He makes excuses and tells her he needs to be there. She gets more and more frantic as the minutes go by. Still, he won't leave, and her phone is in the living room. At one point, he asks her, "Oh, am I scaring you?" She tells him, "Yes, you are scaring me, and you need to leave now." "I was in love with Chad in a past life," he keeps saying. Finally, my mom picks up the baby and walks into the kitchen with Jason, still following her, and calls the cops. After about 30 minutes, they escort him off the property. However, he left his bike there, so she put it out on the road. My mom called my stepfather, and he came back from his vacation the next day. Cops patrolled the house at night, and one evening they caught him trying to break in. As far as I know, he's in jail at the moment. What kills me is that I had barely left the house. I could have been there to help, to scare him off, or call the cops at least. It kills me to know that my mother was caught off guard, sleeping with the baby, and that my little brother Derek was alone with that man. Now, I don't think Jason would have hurt them. I believe he was more of a danger to himself, but you never know. And next time, it could be someone who does intend to hurt them. Poor Derek is really shaken up after that too. Needless to say, my parents have been locking up much more regularly, and this is why I want to be a criminal psychologist. My boyfriend tried to kill me under the influence of drugs when I was 16. I'm not sure how relevant this story is to the thread, and I've been drinking and it feels relevant, so here goes. When I was 16 years old, I made the monumentally bad decision to run away from home and live with my boyfriend at the time, Brad, 19. One of my best friends who was my age, we'll call her Bethany, and her boyfriend Ivan, 23. I can't even begin to enumerate all the ways in which this was a horrible idea and a bad situation. I was a very stupid teenager at the time though, and it seemed adventurous and fun, and I was exhilarated by the lifestyle these men were living. My absolute best friend at the time, also my age, we'll call her Christy, was dating a 20-year-old Alex that was selling psychedelic mushrooms. He always let all of us have first taste so that he would get a general idea of how strong they were and how to charge for them. For some reason that I can't even begin to recall right now, Ivan and Bethany were out of town, and Christy and Alex were staying in the master bedroom for the weekend. There were several Whitecaps in Alex's most recent batch, and those were the ones that we were eating. Over the course of a couple hours, my boyfriend and I were growing restless, and how long it was taking for the drugs to kick in, and stupidly ended up eating 7 grams between us. It didn't take long after the last dose for me to start tripping, and it was a very hard, very uncomfortable, very intense trip. I remember that. It took the drugs longer to hit my boyfriend, so he had to watch over me for an hour while I had a temporary psychological breakdown. I won't go into what I experienced during the trip because that really isn't the point of the post, but against advice. I ended up forcing myself to throw up everything that I could to end the trip as quickly as possible. Alex and Christy were already in bed. After I'd thrown up and was for the most part coming down, I went to lie down with my boyfriend in the dark, and that was when he started tripping. He was thinking very cynically and repeating the words to Tool's songs as if they were Bible passages. None of this struck me as particularly odd for some reason, even though I'd never seen cyclical thinking to this degree during a trip, and the unfamiliarity should have set off alarm bells in my head. Then the scary part started. One minute I was doing my level best to calm him down and reassure him, and the next minute he was on top of me with his head between my hands, trying to break my neck. He didn't try for very long, but I didn't try to run immediately after he'd stopped because I was between him and a wall, and he was much, much larger than me, and I was sure I wouldn't make it. Seeing no other option, I soothed him while I tried to construct an escape. He tried to break my neck twice more before an out presented itself. I have no idea how I survived because he was absolutely physically capable of doing it. A short time after his third attempt to kill me, he somehow decided that we needed to get married. He picked me up and started to carry me completely naked into the bedroom that Alex and Christy were sharing, somehow convinced that one of them could perform legal marriage rites. This was the best opportunity I'd seen to escape, so I did. Before we got to the bedroom, I found him like a wild animal, clawing and writhing and screaming like a banshee. Finally, he lost his grip on me and I fell, then scrambled into the bathroom and locked the door. I vaguely remember knocking over a chair as I ran to slow him down. As soon as I locked the door, I started to hear commotion on the other side. There was yelling and scuffling and unintelligible babbling. And then someone knocked on the door. I was absolutely terrified of losing my life, so I ignored the knocking and started trying to figure out how to open the sealed bathroom window. After about a minute of this desperate knocking, I realized that the knocking was coming from Christy. She'd been yelling the whole time to open the door and let her in. The moment I realized that it was her, I unlocked the door without thinking. As soon as I swung the door open, I saw my boyfriend break out of Alex's arms about 5 feet away from the bathroom door. He knocked my friend out of the way as he ran to get me. Alex had thought that he completely immobilized him, but he was wrong. My boyfriend tackled me to the bathroom floor and redoubled his efforts to break my neck. I remember my head being twisted so far around that I could clearly see the tiny pits on the bathroom towel behind me. I'm incredibly lucky that Alex was there, because I would have been dead if he hadn't been. He yanked my boyfriend off of me long enough for Christy to crash into the bathroom with me and locked the door behind her. I was sobbing uncontrollably, naked and bruised and more terrified than I'd ever been in my whole entire life. But she was clear-headed enough to impress upon me the importance of getting the fuck out of the house. The only clothes that I could find were a wadded-up black sweater with a cat decal on the front and a pair of men's boxers. Both were crusted with dried vomit. My friend finally managed to pry the window open and we crawled outside. Covered in vomit, tears streaked and bruised, I followed her to a nearby friend's house for asylum. I was utterly hysterical by the time we got there, but I managed to give my friends a basic outline of what happened. My friend, Walter, left the apartment, claiming that he had to find my boyfriend, and I absolutely understand that. I even somehow managed to understand it at the time. I knew that this behavior was the drugs talking, not my boyfriend, and that his safety was important as well. I won't say that I thought that he had as much of a claim to safety at that moment as I did, because I was running on adrenaline and determined to survive, and not at all concerned with justice or rational fairness. But he definitely didn't deserve to be forgiven just because some drugs had affected him badly. Finally, I managed to calm down on my friend's couch and stop hyperventilating. It was at that point that Walter arrived back home. And who does he have in tow? My psychotic boyfriend, wrapped in a black curtain with pupils the size of saucers. My friend sat back as he settled onto the couch next to me and started apologizing profusely for what he'd done. I listened for a couple minutes, my body as tense and as rigid as it had ever been, when he started to slip back into that kind of talking. I learned then, through his rambling, that he tried to kill me because he thought that God had told him that he had to kill me so that we could be together in heaven. After I lost the ability to deal with the trauma and the stress, disheartened by my friend's inability to see that his proximity was putting me in danger, I jumped up from the couch and ran out of the apartment complex. I couldn't face another murder attempt, with or without my friends present. I ran all the way to another nearby friend's apartment and ended up staying there for the night, still covered in vomit and tears. I try not to think about how it affected my life, but I'm sure it's had a very negative impact, and I'll never, ever forget it. You know how much I love you. For a few years, I lived in a tiny seaside town in Northern Ireland where not a lot happened and there was only one other girl around my age. We quickly became friends and spent many hours walking up and down the beach during our summer break. It was one of these days, at about the age of 16, when we had opted to sunbath on the empty stretch of sand about a minute walk from the main street. We were chatting about normal things, people from school, teachers, what was on TV the night before when I felt someone standing over us. I looked up to see my friend's much older cousin standing over us grinning. He was about 35 years old, but I had gotten used to him hanging around us, and it wasn't uncommon to find him walking along the beach, so I wasn't all that worried. He told us he had made dinner, and I'd come looking to see if we wanted to join him. Again, this wasn't that unusual, so no red flags went off, and we went to his for dinner, after sending my mom a text letting her know where I was, of course. After dinner, we watched a movie, and then I headed home. Within an hour, I began to receive texts from my friend basically talking about the same things we had talked about at the beach, but I quickly noticed her texting was off, as she began to send increasingly soapy messages. I'm so glad you moved here. I'd be lost without you. You make me so happy. My first thought was that she had gotten drunk in the time since I left and was being particularly needy, so I replied similarly, but I had a feeling in my gut something was off. At about midnight, I heard a knock at the apartment door. My bedroom was the closest, so I went to the door, still half asleep. Did you lift my phone earlier? It was my friend standing at the door. I got annoyed for a few seconds, about to shout because I hadn't seen her since the cousins, and had only stopped responding to her about an hour before. Then I realized why the texts all seemed so weird. They hadn't been from her. I woke up my parents and told them about the messages, and when I went to show them, they were almost 30 unread messages in the hour since I'd fallen asleep. They all ran along the same lines, that they were happy I was there, that I was so much fun to be around, basically saying I was a great friend. However, it was the last text, the last two texts, that made my mom ring the police. I can see you through your skylight. You know how much I love you. A few hours later, my friend's phone was found in her cousin's possession. No threats had been made, so the police couldn't do much, but my family did take a restraining order out against him, and a few months later we moved away. I'm still very close with my friend, but now we only speak over the phone. I'll never trust a text from her again. She says anytime she sees him, he asked how I am and where I live, but luckily she won't tell him. So, creepy impersonating cousin, let's not meet. Please. I love little girls, so after reading all the creepy encounters here, I thought I'd share mine, because when it was happening, I was too ashamed to say anything, and I guess I just blocked it out later. So a little bit of background. I grew up in a city in Pakistan, and I would pretty much tag along everywhere with my dad. There's this one big grocery store that we would always go to, and usually I'd just go to the candy aisle when he was picking up the boring stuff. I must have been around 11 years old at the time, but there was this guy who used to work there, I'm guessing late 20s, and every time I would come to the store, I noticed him staring at me and then following me around the aisles. At first I ignored it, but then he started accidentally brushing past me. So the next few times I just stuck with my dad, but this guy would literally follow us around and wait till my dad got busy and I was alone. Anytime that we made eye contact, this guy would give me the weird smile. I still get the creeps when I think about it, and he'd sing songs, increasing his volume when I refused to make eye contact with him. This kept going on for a while, until I stopped going to that store unless I absolutely had to. One day I was reluctantly dragged there by my dad, and while we were there, he met some friend of his, and they were chatting, etc., so he told me to grab some chickpeas from the aisle, and met him at the counter. The minute I got to the aisle, the creepy man was there and he was smiling in that way again. I said nothing and quickly grabbed the packet, but he was just standing in my way. And then he goes, "I really like young girls." And he starts singing a song again. I stood there just frozen, and he pinched my back and left the aisle whistling. I ran to my dad and never went back again. Weirdly enough, that guy got fired from the store 2 months later because he was behaving inappropriately with a lady in the store. The lady in question, my mother. Fucked up relationship. I was 15 years old, and I just got out of a 9-month relationship with my first boyfriend. I was feeling quite bad about myself, and had just been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. So when A appeared in my life and made me feel special, I ignored my gut feeling about him. I met him through a close friend. Looking back, he was never someone I would have been interested in. But I was in an extremely vulnerable place as I'm writing this. It's the first time I realized how vulnerable I was at that stage. It made me feel special. He was tall, handsome, and popular, and I was unpopular and bullied, and in my eyes, gross, disgusting, and unlovable. I looked for validation through him. At first, he wouldn't commit to calling each other girlfriend and boyfriend. He had some weird idea that we were too mature for that sort of thing. I was 15 and he was 16. He admitted to me that he had ADHD and was on medication for it. He was very hyperactive and enthusiastic. He was also insensitive, and deliberately did things to make me angry or annoyed. At one point, he got angry at me for being on antidepressants. After being together for almost a month, he came to stay at my house for a week. When he got there, he was acting really strangely, and was being overly sexual in front of people. He would grab my bum in front of my much younger brother, and I would tell him not to, and he would laugh at me and tell me I was sexy when I was angry, and do it again, all in front of my brother. One day we were eating sour straps, and he put one in his mouth, and made me put the other one in my mouth, then ate it until our mouths reached, and then he bit my lip and made it bleed. It hurt a lot, and all he did was laugh at me while I cried. Before he had come to stay, we had talked about sex, and I had said yes, I probably would. When he got to my house, I changed my mind, and made it very clear that I wasn't ready. He kept making comments about how, if I really loved him, I would do it, and got angry because I had done it with my last boyfriend and wouldn't do it with him. He said he just wanted to show me how much he loved me. One night I was having a get-together with my friends, and A made a dumb comment in front of everyone about him getting lucky that night. So only because he'd been pressuring me, guilting me, and acting cocky, I embarrassed him in front of everyone and made it clear that he would not be getting lucky. This upset him, and he took me to another room and got angry at me, and told me I need to let him show me he loved me. I ignored him, and went back to my friends. I found out later that he had asked for and received condoms from one of the guys that were there. Another night, we were at the local theater, and I was involved in the backstage work for a production of Alice in Wonderland. He spent the entire night hanging around out the back, checking himself out in the mirrors and annoying everyone. He was acting like a dick, and annoyed a lot of my friends. None of them liked him. He was doing dumb stuff like playing with fire extinguishers and attempting to make out with me in front of my friends and teachers. The following night, my cousins turned up and needed a place to stay. She is only 2 months younger than me, and we were always very close. She was having trouble at home and stayed at our house often. At one point, she went outside to have a smoke, leaving me alone in my room with A. He and I were hooking up, and then he asked if we could please have sex. I said no. I said no every time, and he just kept asking. Then he decided to just go ahead and do it. He pulled my pants down, and I froze. I didn't get up or walk away or scream or anything. I was afraid and confused. I told him, if you're gonna do this, at least get a condom. So he did. I thought if I'm a good girlfriend, I'll do this. I was also concerned that he would get angry, as he had shown slightly violent tendencies when he didn't get the things he wanted. He grabbed my arm once, sometimes he yelled, so I let it happen and pretended to enjoy it for about 10 seconds, and then came the tears. I told him to get back off, but he didn't until I was sobbing. I was shaking and crying, and I couldn't stop. My cousin came back and took me into another room to figure out what had happened. When I finally calmed down a little, we went back to my room. I grabbed my blanket and pillow and laid on the floor, but A got annoyed at me and told me to stop being stupid and to get into bed. I hopped into bed and lay there all night crying, while the person who had caused me to feel that way held me. The next day, we went into the city with my mom and brother to see a musical. A started doing cartwheels down the busy streets of Melbourne and being loud and obnoxious. He acted like nothing had happened. He kept getting angry at me because I wouldn't kiss or hold his hand. On the train ride home, I started crying and he just looked at me and said, "That would make a pretty picture." I went to his house for a few days after that. I tried to pretend everything was fine. I didn't want to cause any trouble and I thought that it was my fault for not being clear enough. I was also afraid of him. I mean, he really scared me. He had this insane look in his eye and he didn't seem to react or connect with things the way most people do. When I got to his house, I found out he had gone off his medication before coming to my house because he wanted me to see the real him. He tried to convince me to go off my medication too, but I refused. He took me on a tour of his neighborhood one day and pointed all the places he had whacked in the bushes. It was really fucking weird. One of the nights there, he literally held me down and forced me to watch porn. He had hundreds of video files and I told him I wasn't interested in seeing it, but he held me down and forced me to watch. The next night was my last night. I remember laying in his bed and seeing on Facebook that my friend and her boyfriend had broken up. And I was like, I suddenly remember that doing that was actually an option. I broke up with him that night. The next morning I was packing, and he told me he wanted to show me something. He started playing Goodbye My Lover by James Blunt on YouTube, and told me I had to sit and listen even though I had heard it before. Then he told me that his cat wasn't coming near me because it could sense that A was upset with me. There was a lot more bizarre behavior throughout our relationship that I never understood. For a year after I broke up with him, he kept Facebook messaging me and calling me to tell me how he did nothing wrong. When I blocked him on Facebook, he started calling and texting. I changed my number, but he found my new one. Eventually, he gave up when I ignored him for months, and multiple friends of mine told him to fuck off and out of my life. I found out later that A had been raped by his older brother's friend when he was younger, so this makes me realize that his idea of love and relationships were contorted, and so I can kind of understand why he was so confused about how relationships worked. But that still isn't an excuse for pressuring and guilting someone into something. After this happened, I began self-harming, and my mental health got a lot worse. I have minor PTSD, can't handle unexpected touching, and sometimes any touching at all. The friends that I met A through still sees him because he is her brother's friend. On the long list of creepy things he has done and said to my friend, one of the creepiest is that, at a party, he followed my friend around all night and stared at her. She confronted him and asked why he was staring at her, and he said, "I like to look at things that I can't have." And once he told her he was psychic. So A, let's never ever ever meet again because you are a fucked up individual, and I do not wish for you to impact on my life any more than you already have.